So, wherever you're joining from, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the user group. So, like I say, I'm Jenny Martin. I'm one of the leaders for this user group. You'll recognize Jack Parry as well. He has been the leader from the beginning, and we have also a new leader joining us today, Beth Kairys, and she is down in Australia. She is with InterWorks. She will be presenting in just a moment, so I'm sure she'll give more of an introduction to herself then. But yeah, welcome Beth, and we're excited to have you on board. Excited to be covering the Australia APAC market a little bit more with all of our prep knowledge and user group experiences. So yeah, that's going to be great for all of us to get some more insights and experiences using prep. So we actually have, we're very lucky today that we have our leaders who are presenting. I will get to that in just one second. First of all, I'm just going to mention some prep resources first. So free prep training, where can you get access to prep training if you're new to prep, if you want to brush up on your skills? Then we have Thursday trainings at 3 p.m., which is 3 p.m. UK time, that can be accessed for free. They are run by the Information Lab. We've got a Tableau prep learning path starting again on the 14th of October, so tomorrow, in fact. So yeah, actually I'm running that session. So if you're joining that, then that'll be a great time to get into those prep basics. And you can find all that information at that link there. Okay, so if we get into the user group, then our speakers today are going to be Beth Kairys, talking all about top 5 prep solves. And then after that, we will have Jack Parry presenting some information about how to connect to APIs in Tableau prep. So Beth, would you like to start sharing your screen and take over?
Certainly. Awesome. Can you see my screen okay?
Yep, all good.
Perfect. Excellent. Thank you so much, Jenny. So as Jenny mentioned, I'm going to be taking you through today my top 5 prep solves. And these are 5 things that I find myself turning to again and again, and that I think if you conquer nothing else, can help you solve a ton of data challenges. So in terms of me, my name is Beth Kairys. I'm an analytics consultant for InterWorks, and I'm based in Melbourne in Australia, hence the accent. So InterWorks is a global firm covering everything from IT infrastructure through to data management, strategy, and enablement. As Jenny mentioned, I'm also your newest Tableau prep user group leader, so you'll see a fair chunk of me henceforth. Always feel free to reach out to me. My details are there on the screen. So I'm beth.kairys@interworks.com. So my role at InterWorks spans discrete projects, client enablement, and management of a program called Assist, which provides on-demand support to clients across a range of products, including prep. And as part of this, I see a lot of clients' data prep problems. So today I'm going to share with you the top things that I turn to prepare client data, or that I train clients in when I'm helping them learn data prep. So what are the 5? So these first 2 are super basic. We're talking pivoting and aggregation. But they're the most common things I see clients hitting issues with. Pivoting and aggregations themselves can be done in Tableau Desktop, but often data is in such a way that it makes this a bit tricky to accomplish. So in a little bit, I'm going to step you through an example that's based on something that came across my desk recently, but that's pretty indicative of the sorts of things clients end up needing to use prep for, and the sorts of ways that pivoting and aggregation come into those. My next one here is lookup tables, specifically joining a lookup table. So this is an amazing tip and an amazing thing to turn to. So imagine that you have data for different products and you want to create a ship date, so the date you expect a product to ship. But instead of this being standard, the time varies by product. So say it's 2 days after order for one, 8 days after order for another, 12 for a third. You might be thinking you can conquer this with ifs and case statements, and you can. But what if instead of 5 products, you have 100? And then even worse, what if these timelines change? So you need to be regularly going in and updating those case statements, and then maybe only updating them for future stuff, not previous stuff. And even worse again, what if not only the number, but also the formula starts varying by product? So you need to jump between something that's indexed by something in A versus something indexed by something in B. Well, then you're into territory for prep. Date function. This is actually in my top 5 for desktop or prep. I've done some mammoth blogs on this in desktop as well. It's just so common. I really can never seem to stop getting questions about dates. So you're going to hear me talking about them a lot and emphasizing it a lot. So in this, I'm going to cover some of my most commonly used ones, which are generally pretty simple things around making dates, adding to them, and comparing. And keep in mind that all of the logic you're going to see in this can be translated to desktop as well. So just a great thing to get your head around whatever product you're using. My last one is combining data with different structures. So this is a really common reason people end up using Tableau Prep. So it's more of an approach and a general tip to be comfortable with joins and when to join or union, but it's common enough that I wanted to have it here. So let's say someone has a few different sets of data and you want to bring them together. So you've got data in column A or table A and data in table B, but they're structured a bit differently. So some changes can be made in desktop, but imagine you need to prepare the first item in a series of ways. You have, say, 10 steps to prepare the first thing, and then you've got to prepare the other thing in 5 steps, and they're different steps, and then you've got to smush them together. Well, that's going to be pretty difficult outside of prep. So these are the 5 things that I find myself doing the most often. And I'm going to show you how to do them with an example data set. So this is our data set here. The data set is a dummy data of complaints data. So there's a few elements that I want to point out. So I've got a couple of different things here. I've got my ticket ID and my business unit and my owner. So these are all things about, from the business's perspective, what number ticket is this? Who did it come into? What unit's responsible? And who's taking responsibility for the ticket? Then I've got some stuff that's about the ticket itself. So I've got the issue and the management strategy. What happened and what have we committed to? Then I've got the date that the ticket came in. I can already see this is in a bit of an annoying format, so I'm probably going to want to do something about this. I've got the status of the ticket. So where's it up to in the process? And then I've got the rating. So 1, 2, or 3. And I'm going to want to turn that into a low, medium, and high. But you might be looking at this data set and thinking, doesn't look that bad, looks pretty good. And it does. But imagine we want to analyze it to see, in the last quarter, how many tickets did we go into the quarter with? How many were new? What did we complete? And what were we left with? So the result we want is more like this chart here. Opening number, new number, completed, deferred, and then that outstanding. And if we think back to our data set, well, we've got some of these elements. We've got completed, we've got deferred, we've got them here, over here in this status. What we're really missing is this concept of something being an opening case or a new case. Now, sadly for us, this isn't as simple as just dividing these in progress items into ones that are kind of have been here for a while or new, because something could have come in last quarter, in which case it's counted as an opening, and then also have been completed last quarter, so it's counted as completed. So we need to count it twice. It's a bit tricky. And we also want to be able to combine this with data from another business unit that's formatted a little bit differently. So this is the data set we're going to work to. This is the result we're chasing, this sort of clean waterfall chart. And this is the data set, very similar to what we're going to be looking to create. So we've got 3 columns only: the status of the item, the number of cases that have that status, and the rating. And that lets us see, for example, going into the quarter that's upcoming, how many cases do we have across, say, high and medium risk levels? Okay, so let's jump into our demo. So I'm going to go through the process of cleaning up this data set with you, and I'm going to point out the things along the way that fall into these top 5. So here's our Tableau prep. We're going to start by dragging in business unit A. I'm just going to get this to fill the screen. So business unit A. Within business unit A, we've got those 2 elements that we mentioned that we're going to want to look at. Those 2 elements being a date that's not formatted in the way that we really love. We've got year, month, and date in different items. And then we've also got that rating, which is falling into those kind of 1s, 2s, and 3s. And we want the far more human-friendly low, medium, and high. So let's go through that process of cleaning it up. So I'm first going to add a clean step. Click my plus and add a clean step. Now that I've clicked my clean step, I'm going to create a calculated field. So I'm going to click Create Calculated Field. The first one that I'm going to deal with is that date. So I'm going to create something called Date Lodged. And the way that I'm going to create it is I'm going to use the formula Make Date. If you're ever needing to see what formulas you've got, this little pop out, you can see here that you've got this little guy here. Let's see if I can, this one here. If you press that pop out, that's going to show you the formulas that are available to you. And if I type in a formula, I'm going to see how to drive it. So make date, constructed of the year, the month, and the day. So I'm going to add in my year, comma, my month, comma, my day. Oops, that day is a function. It's called date. There you go. Date, and then end my bracket, and click save. And we can see that prep's gone off and it's created me this far more helpful date, 17th of the 4th, 2021. I now don't need these 3. So I'm just going to come across to here. I'm going to hold down Control and select all 3 of my items, right click and remove. And now I've just got that new helpful date rather than all of that guff that I had before. The next thing I'm going to deal with is this rating. You can see here I've got 1, 2, and 3. And I have a better option available to me. So if I go back to my Excel sheet, this is my data set that's actually coming into prep. I've got this really helpful tab called risk level that tells me what 1, 2, and 3 actually mean. So I'm going to drag in that risk level and I'm going to join it. So drag in risk level. And then I'm going to create a join. So I'm going to click my plus, click join, and then left click my risk level and drag it on so that it's part of the join. I then have to tell Tableau what to join it on. So when I click on my join, it's going to give me the prompt that says applied join clauses. It hasn't picked up on any. The reason it didn't pick up on any was because these things weren't called exactly the same thing. I know that one of them is called rating and the other one's called risk level. So I can just tell Tableau rating is equal to risk level. Now, it's not going to matter much for this particular circumstance, but I am going to have a think about the type of join here. I want to keep everything from my initial data set, and I want to join in those additional ratings. So that rating information. So keep everything from my original and then join in those rating names. So I'm going to make this a left join. So this is our lookup table. This is a classic example of one that I probably could have done with a case statement or an if. But again, I wanted to show you the lookup table approach because it's much more scalable. Because imagine that this risk level thing has to change every month and it's a different number every month. Or we've got 1,000 different ratings in here. Much, much more complex. So good practice to have around how to bring these sorts of things in. So then I'm going to click Clean Step to create a new clean step. I like clean steps not only because it helps me clean my data, but it also helps me see how my data is starting to shape up. So I can see that down the bottom here, I've got date lodged, ticket ID, business unit, all this stuff I had before. And then over on the right-hand side here, I have rating, risk level, and risk rating. I don't need this rating and risk level items anymore. So I'm going to scroll over to the right-hand side, hold down Control, right-click, and remove them. And now I have dropped those elements. Okay. So this is starting to look pretty good. I'm going to let you in on a little secret. It actually now looks like the data from business unit B, mostly. Now, I should mention, if you have questions as I go through this, feel free to use that Q&A button at the bottom of your controls. So if you're seeing me do some of these things and you're thinking, wait, what was that? How does that work with this instance? Please feel free to use that Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom controls, and I'll keep an eye on it as I go through. So these two data sets are now looking similar, business unit A and business unit B. The key with joining tables that are shaped in different ways is that you want to get them to a similar place before you try and join or union them. For business unit B, most of these items are already done. So my date lodged is in a nice, helpful format. My rating is in this nice low, medium, high, not that 1, 2, 3. I do have this guff across the top though, this kind of date stamp area and stuff section. So just keep in mind, I'm going to want to clean that up as I bring it in. So to bring it in, I'm just going to drag in business unit B, just so that I have it in my view. And then you can see here that Prep hasn't really known what to do with all that guff. It's kicked off these things called F3, F4, F5. That's just picking up field 3, field 4, field 5. But I have this really handy button. It's over here on the left-hand side and called Use Data Interpreter. And it's designed to deal with situations just like this. So I have a data set that's mostly nice and clean, but I got this kind of random stuff at the top, and I want to get rid of the random stuff. So I click my data interpreter. Now I'm going to click my plus so that I can see my clean step, just so that I can see this data. I could see it back here. I can go and have a look and kind of click through and get a little bit of an idea about what's happening and then see what my fields are. But as prep prompts, it's a really good idea to just add that clean step to view it. And now I can compare it to this one, get an idea. Do these look pretty similar? I'm pretty happy. Let's give it a whirl. So I'm going to click this plus button, and this time I'm going to click Union. Now, quick reminder, joins and unions. Joins add columns. So our original data set had a bunch of information, including the risk rating. And then I added in some additional information. So I added in some additional columns. I said, these ones are common. Bit here is common. And what I was chasing was the addition of this particular column. A union is a little bit different. A union adds rows. So here I have stuff from business unit A. Oops, try not to clear the whole thing. Let's try that again. Here I have stuff from business unit A. And I have the same columns, but I want to add stuff for business unit B. So I'm going to go and add it below. So instead of adding columns, I'm going to add rows. And so what I want is that similarity in those columns and that setup and that structure, which is why I've gone through this process of cleaning them separately. Now I can see a question's come in. That is jumping ahead a little bit, so I will come back to that, but I totally understand. Let's write it down now while we're thinking of it. Okay, so we've got our unions that are quite similar. Oh, sorry, our data sets that are quite similar. So let's union them now. So I'm going to click the plus and click union. And I'm going to add in this other data set. So I'm going to click this item and drag it up to union it. Now, Prep has popped things in the place that makes the best use of the space. I am a little bit anal and retentive in that I really like to have things in a similar location. So I'm going to change this bit. I tend to go through this process of having stuff that is an input on the far left. And then whenever I join or union, I step down, and that helps me find my way through a flow later on. How you set up your flow, totally personal, but that's just my kind of personal way of doing it so that I don't get lost throughout my flow. So I've got my union here. Now, a key with a union is that sometimes the columns aren't quite going to match. So you can see here that I've got mismatch fields: unit, rating, business unit, risk rating. They're actually the same, but they've just not got quite the same terminology. So to force combine them, I'm going to hold one, control click and get the other one, right click, merge. And now I've combined those fields. I've told Tableau they are actually the same. Please put them together. I'm going to do the same with risk rating. Hold down control, right click, merge. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drop this table names reference. This just tells me which table it was originally. One of them's called B, one of them's called A, but I've got A's and B's over here. Right click, remove. Keeping it nice and clean as I go through the process. Okay, so we've conquered a couple of steps in that top 5. Let's keep going. Got another clean step. Now, if you remember, the core thing that we were looking at and that we were wanting to get an eye of was actually this. So how do we get to this waterfall chart? Now, we've done a little bit of this process, but it's still not quite looking like this. The key thing we're going to do now is we're going to focus on creating these concepts of opening, new, and outstanding. Now, the logic we're going to use is that an opening case is one where the date lodged is prior to the beginning of the current quarter. So it was there when our quarter began. See where my mouse is? There it is. A new case is one where the date lodged was greater than or equal to the beginning of the current quarter. And there. Completed and deferred are actually just things called defeated and conferred. So this is status equals completed. This is status equals deferred. And this last one here of outstanding, this is a running total. So you can think of it as opening plus new minus completed, and then also minus deferred, so that running total. So now that we have a concept of what we're trying to create, let's go back and make these calcs. So first, I'm going to create the calculation of the beginning of the current quarter. And the beginning of the current quarter, that's a date trunk. So I have a concept of the day that I'm at. And so all I'm going to do is I'm going to truncate the date that I'm at to the beginning of that quarter. I can look up my function over here if I like, add in date trunk. And so I have quarter today. And click save. And now I've created a stamp for the beginning of the current quarter. Tableau has helpfully kicked it off as a date time. I just need a date. So I can click this little icon here on the top left and change it to a date. 1st of the 10th. I can see my changes just by toggling this guy open and shut. And now that I've got the date the current quarter began, I can create those additional calcs. So opening cases, remember, is where the date lodged is less than the beginning of the current quarter. Now I'm going to write this as an if statement because I want it to queue off a number, because then I'm going to start counting those totals. Oh yes, I can see here, one of these items is kicking back as a string. So let's click save and see which date is actually being brought in as a string. Aha, this guy, ABC. Click my ABC, make sure he's a date, and then helpfully drag that step above the previous one. This is one of those super helpful items of prep that make it so much more useful than doing things in something like Excel, which I know lots of people still turn to, because I can change the order that way. So super easy. I can follow my logic, and then if I realize I needed to do something, I just go back and do it, move it further up the line. So what happens earlier in my process. I then want to create a concept of new cases, and it's pretty similar. So I'm going to right-click copy, right-click paste, and then use the calculation that I'd written before as the basis for my new one. So now it's where the date lodged is greater than or equal to the beginning of the current quarter. And I can click save. And now I can see that a bunch of my cases have been declared as new, and a bunch of my cases have been declared as opening cases. Some additional ones I wanted to create. I wanted to create deferred. Now, you might be thinking, but didn't deferred exist? It did. But this will make sense in a moment, I promise, because what we're going to do is we're going to aggregate things with a certain title. So now I have deferred, and I can see that I've got some cases that are being called deferred. And then finally, I'm going to create that concept of completed. So create calculated field again. And this one is if my status equals capital, I believe, completed, then 1, and I click save. So now I've got those cases. Some things are completed, some things are deferred, some things are new, some things are opening. And if you look carefully, you can see that some things have multiple codes. So an opening, in this case here, 21, was both opening and completed. So it's been counted in both of those categories, which, as I mentioned before, was one of those things we needed to make sure this did. And one of the reasons that I did it that way, so that we're not just counting the status over here. So now we're going to aggregate and pivot. So the first thing we're going to do is aggregate, because we want those total numbers. We don't want every row to be a 1 or a null. We just want the total. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab everything that I'm wanting to create a total for. And that's all those statuses. So completed, deferred, new, and opening. And I'm going to drag them over to my aggregated field section. And now you can see I have 23 opening, 11 new, 3 deferred, and 13 completed. Now, the item I wanted to make sure I kept was rating. So let's make sure that we're keeping rating. Let's drag risk rating into grouped fields. And now you can see that I essentially end up with, for every category of risk rating, low, medium, and high, that same set of numbers. Okay, it's looking pretty good. Let's add a clean step. Is this what we wanted? Almost. We're missing a field. Our field is the one that counts that we were going into the next group with. So that one that I mentioned of, we've got that running total. So let's remind ourselves, what's that running total that we were chasing? Outstanding. Okay, let's make sure we've created that concept of outstanding. I'm going to click my calculated field, create a concept of outstanding, and outstanding, remember, is that running total. Opening plus new, minus deferred, and minus completed. And click save. Now, anyone who's familiar with adding things with nulls will realize that I'm going to have a bit of a problem here. So there's a null for deferred. And when you add things together and one of them is null, Tableau is going to give you a null. So the first thing I needed to do here was make sure that I am doing what's called a zero null, which essentially just tells Tableau, please replace anything that has a null with a 0. I'm just going to do it for deferred, just for this example, and drag it up. But you're going to want to do that if you did something like this for every one of these, just in case a null comes in later. You can also do it here, so you can zero null each of these items. But I need these numbers anyway, so I might as well just do it on these original. And then if we go back to our data set, we've got one more step, which is instead of each status appearing across the screen as a different column, we want it to appear down within one column. So we're going to pivot our data. So our last step, we add a plus, click pivot. And now I want to tell Tableau, please pivot all of these items, completed, deferred, new, opening, and outstanding. And I'm just going to grab them all and drag them into pivot fields. And now I have, for example, one column here, which I'm going to call status, by right-clicking, clicking rename, and then changing it to status. One column, which I'm going to call cases. And then this last column, which is called risk rating. And there we have it. That's our final data set. So, bit of a whirlwind tour, but what did we learn? So if we go back to that top 5, we covered how to pivot and how to aggregate and why you might need to aggregate and pivot. So aggregations are things like, I want total numbers, not just a 1 against every row. And well, maybe I also need to pivot my data so that it's all within the same column. And importantly, you can pivot rows to columns as well as columns to rows. So if things just aren't quite in the shape you need, it's a great thing to have in your toolbox. We covered joining a lookup table and why you might want to do that before you do things like ifs and cases, just because it's a lot easier to expand on. We covered quite a few date functions. We did a make date, we did a date trunk, and we compared dates to each other. There are a bunch more in there, but that probably gives you a little bit of a taster of some different dates. And we talked combining data of different structures. The general approach being, before you whack them together, try and make sure they're as similar as possible. So you're going through that cleaning process to make one, and then going through the cleaning process to make the other. And only when they're combined, only when they're, similar, do you click combined. Now, I think we are actually at time for me. So if you do have questions about that, and I can see one jumping into the Q&A, please pop them into the Q&A, and I'm more than happy to either answer them as you're going through with Jack, or to have a conversation with you about them later, and we'll go from there. Awesome. I hope this was helpful for you. And I personally will see you next time, or if you want to reach out and have another chat, please do so. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for that, Beth. That was so step by step and easy to follow. Like, I'm sure that everyone picked up some new things. I love seeing how like other people build their workflows as well. I think I might steal that idea of like moving things down, like as you're joining things in. Like, that's great. I love it. So thanks for saying you'll answer those questions in the chat. And now we'll hand over to Jack.
Thanks, Jenny. Let me just take control. Cool. So hopefully you can see my screen.
Yep, all good.
Yeah. Okay, great. So I am going to talk to you today about TabPy and how you can connect to APIs in Tableau Prep. So something that I came across a while ago when I was first starting out with Tableau Prep was that I really felt there was an inability to connect to sort of web-based data that, you know, you need a native connector in Tableau Prep to connect to. And the prep team are doing a great job of, you know, constantly building out those connectors, and every prep release we have more and more. But sometimes we might want to, you know, collect data from an API, and we might want to have that data, you know, updating in real time and collecting the latest day's data and using that in our prep flow. So I started doing some digging and came up with a solution of how you can do this using a Python script in TabPy. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. Just before I dive into it, some of you will be very familiar with me. As Jenny mentioned at the beginning, I started the prep user group at the beginning of 2020. So we've been running it for about 18 months now, and then earlier this year I brought Jenny on board, and then now recently we've also brought Beth on board, as typically before our sessions would be focused on Europe and the US, always accommodating the time zone for that region. Whereas now with the help of Beth, we're going to be looking at, you know, making these sessions a bit more global. So for Europe, this is an early start, or especially in London, but then our next session will be focused on, you know, APAC and the US. So the sessions will rotate. So I'm a consultant at the Information Lab in London. I was part of our data school training program. For those of you that aren't familiar with that, it's a 2.5-year program where we take in consultants to, you know, kickstart their journey in data analytics. So we have a 4-month training period at the beginning where we work with Tableau, Alteryx, Snowflake, AWS, some other, you know, tools, and skills to prepare yourself to be a consultant in that field. And then they carry out 4 6-month placements with the data school here in London. And we do also have one in Sydney and in Melbourne now. Well, I need to drink something. So yeah, that's me if you haven't met me before. But diving into the session now, as I said, the goal of this is to pull some data from an API. And to do that, you can use what's known as the scripting step in Tableau Prep. So the scripting step will allow you to run either a Python or an R script in your flow and tie that in with your existing data. There are 2 options when you do this, obviously Python or R, and we'll see that when I set it up in the workflow in just a second. But with Python, you use something called TabPy, and this is an extension that allows you to leverage Python code in your workflow or your workbook. So you can also use this, you can use Python code in Tableau Desktop as well, if anyone was unaware of that. And then so TabPy is the server that you run that allows you to execute that code. So if you were doing this with R, the equivalent is called rserve, but in my case, I've used Python. And so to be able to, use TabPy and utilize a Python script, you do have to develop your own script sort of outside of Tableau Prep, and then you just browse to the location and execute that within your workflow. So I will show you how you can do that. So you have to have TabPy also running on either your local machine, or you may want to have that hosted on a remote server. So in my case today, I will just show you TabPy running on my local machine because, it's just a localized demo. But if I was, going to deploy this to my Tableau server, I'd probably want to set TabPy up on, a virtual machine so it can just sit there running away in the background. Because if I had it running on my machine, then when I turn my laptop off, my workflow on the server is not going to run. You could also set TabPy up to run on your Tableau server machine. So that's another option. And then the full install instructions are, here on GitHub. So I can share those with you if you're interested in doing this after the session. It's really simple installation process. So you can, if you were deploying this for production, you'd probably want to control some of the variables, like you might want to apply a username and a password. You might want to use SSL certificates to encrypt the data and the communication. But if you were to just use it, locally like I am today, to execute a really simple script, then you literally just have to run these 2 commands. So you want to make sure your pip environment is upgraded, and then you can literally just run pip install TabPy. It will go off, install that for you, and then all you need to do to set TabPy up and running is to execute the command TabPy. So it's a really, really simple process, and I will show you that just now in a demo. I won't show you the installation process because I do already have it installed on my machine, but take my word for it that this is very straightforward to follow. And as I said, if you want to set up a more complex configuration, all of that information is there on GitHub that you can go and look at. And yeah, I will put maybe I'll just put that in the chat now, actually. Just drop that in there so I don't forget. Cool. So with that, we're going to start diving into the challenge that we have in Tableau Prep that we want to try and solve. So the challenge that I've got here is I've got some, made up sales data from a store, and all of my sales are in different currencies. As the purchases were made in different locations, and I want a way of easily converting those currencies into, one localized currency so I can see my total sales. So I'm going to bring in my sales data now. which is in a text file, I think. I've got my sales data, and we're just going to open that up. And we can see here, so we've got some transaction IDs, the name of the customer, the email address, the purchase date, the item size, and the spend and the currency code. So we can see if we just, preview our data here, that I've got some purchases in Australian dollars, Canadian dollars, US dollars, and euros. And you can probably see where I'm going with this. We're going to receive some exchange rate data from an API. My data set here is already fairly clean. There's nothing I really need to do to it. I'm just going to connect to that API and download that exchange rate data. There's a few things that I want to do before we get to that step. So the way the scripting tool works is that I can't just, you'll see here, if I go to add a connection to my clean one, I can add a script here, but I can't just, decide to start my flow with a script. I have to have an input into the scripting tool, and then TabPy or RServe will go off, take in that data frame, do something with it, and then whatever I've defined in my script, and then give me an output. And so in this case, I actually am going to just read in a dummy data set. So the only reason I have this is to be, a data frame to read into my Python script. So it doesn't do anything else other than get overwritten, but it's what I'm going to connect my scripting step up to. So if I bring this in, you'll see that it's literally just one column that says dummy. And so that's going to go into the scripting tool. My Python script is going to look for a data frame because it needs to have some kind of table that it can output, and it's going to overwrite this. So what I'm going to do next is we're going to add that scripting tool. You can see here we've got this is a new one, new rows, which came out in 2021.3. So if you're on an earlier version of Tableau Prep and this seems unfamiliar with you, that would be why. But I'm going to go and add a script. And so now we get this configuration option. And as I mentioned earlier, you can either connect to RServe, which is what you would do if you were running an R script, or you can connect to what they say Tableau Python server, so TabPy. And we have to set up our analytics extension connection to be able to configure the connection. So in earlier versions of Tableau, I think this changed in, I'm going to take a wild guess, I think it's like 2020.4 maybe. Before, you would configure your connection to your server in this step in the scripting tool. But that would mean every single time you put a scripting tool onto your flow, you would have to reconfigure that connection type. And so what Tableau went and did was just changed it. So within your file here, you can just manage the analytics extension and just have the connection type saved for the whole flow. So if I go up to help, and then I can go to settings and performance, and then this option to manage analytics extension connection. And now for Tableau, for TabPy, I actually do already have this set up. So for RServe, you'll see there's nothing in there, and that's why I'm getting this indication to go and configure it. But for TabPy, I do already have this set up. And what I'm saying here, my server is going to be localhost because TabPy is running on my machine, or will be in just a moment. And TabPy by default runs on port 9004. So you can change that when you configure TabPy server, but by default it's 9004. So when you're setting this up, you need to make sure you've you've got that port in there. If you were to set this up on a remote desktop or a virtual machine, then your server would want to be the public IP address of that machine. I did actually produce a tutorial video on how you can set this up. So it looks at how you could spin up a virtual machine on AWS and host your TabPy server there, and then have a workflow like this running on your Tableau server. So it doesn't always have to be localized. So we can share that with you afterwards if you're interested in this. Again, you can have a username and password. In my case, I haven't set that up on my TabPy server. And you can also, enable SSL to encrypt that data. But you can just hit sign in. And so now when I go to Tableau Python server, you'll see here, it knows it's trying to connect to localhost. But I need to browse for my script that I've developed, and I need to define a function name. So if we just have a look at this window, what my script is doing is it's importing the libraries that I need to use to run this script. And then I've defined a function which will just flatten my JSON data. So I appreciate if you're not familiar with scripting or writing code, then this might be a bit much, but just bear with it and I'll show you the output in Tableau Prep. So the data from the API comes in a bit of a nested JSON format. So this section here, this define flatten JSON, just tells Python like how it should deal with that nested data, because if I just read that straight into Tableau Prep, it's quite difficult to clean that kind of data in Tableau Prep. You could do it, but it would be a lot of ripping it apart and putting it back together. And so if I can do that here, it means my currencies and my exchange rates that come straight in from the scripting tool will be in a much nicer format. So that's this whole step here. And then what I've done is I've got a dummy data frame again to read into my next function. So I've just created a table that literally says dummy 1, 2, 3. And I'm just going to put that data frame into my function that calls my currency API, because again, it needs that table to overwrite with the data. So this final section is just defining that function, which I then call in Tableau Prep. So when it says function name here, this is the specific function in my Python script that I want to call in Tableau Prep. So you can have multiple functions in the script, but this is the one you want to execute. So you could have, I don't know, 5 different functions that cleaned or manipulated your data in various ways. And then the final function would probably call those and output your data. So this is what I want to define here. So what it does, I specify the URL of my my API, which is just an exchange rates API. This demo used to be much better in that. So this API was free for ages. And so you could get loads of historical exchange rates. So you could specify a start date and an end date and get all of those rates across different days. But when I went to practice this the other day and test out the script, as I hadn't looked at it in a while, it turns out they've changed the API and you now have to pay for it. So I had to tweak this script. So you can see here actually commented out that before I could specify, a start date, an end date, so date, time, today, and a base currency. Whereas now with my free access, I can only get a certain day, which is frustrating, but still works. So I specify my access key to the API, and then I make this request. So my response is going to be a GET request with my URL, my parameters, and then I say my data is that response in JSON format. Then I use my flatten JSON to flatten that JSON data into a data frame. So I've now got a table, and then you just rename the columns. So I'm just calling it currency and rate. The data that comes from an API, from the API, there's some rows at the top of it where I don't really want those. So, I can get rid of those. And then finally, I just cast them as data types. So I can say my currency is a string and my rate is a float. And then I'm going to return that data frame. And that's what will be output to Tableau. The final step of the script is this define get output schema. And this is really, really important when working with scripting in Tableau Prep, because as much as I call this currency API function in Tableau Prep, that's what I specify I want to call. You have to have this get output schema function somewhere in your script. And what this does, it tells TabPy how your data is going to be output. So in this case, I say my date currency, or this field, I'm actually just going to tweak these to be currency, not date currency. So my currency code is going to be what's called a prep string. So these are, you can find these in the Tableau documentation, and it tells you exactly what you need to call different data types. And then my rate is going to be a prep decimal. And so if you don't specify this, Tableau Prep's not going to know how to output your data. The only exception to that is if your table structure is exactly the same as what goes into the scripting tool. So you see how we have the dummy step here, where I've just got a numerical field and it says 1, 2, 3. If I just was outputting a table with one column that was a numerical field, I wouldn't have to define that output schema, because Prep knows that what's going, well, it will just assume that what's going in is what's coming out. Whereas this get output schema allows you to say, hey, I've actually changed the data in there and you need to output it in a different format. So now we can call this function. That was a bit of, explaining a script, which is not the most exciting thing, but I'll show you how we get TabPy up and running, and we can now call this function in Prep. So as I mentioned, I already have TabPy installed. So in my terminal here, I'm just going to type TabPy, and that should get up and running. So it's initialized the server, and you can see here that web service is listening on port 9004. And that's the port that I specified in my configuration. So I've got my connection. I need to browse for my script. So I've got this currency converter.py, which we can see from this preview is basically just what I walked you through. So I'm going to open that up. And now, before, we're still seeing an error, we want to specify the function name that we're going to call, which is my call currency API. So I'm just going to type in. Now, if I hit enter, Tableau is going to read that script and should give me some data if all goes well. It's always a bit stressful doing this live. So if we look here, we can see that TabPy is actually working in the background to execute that script. So we can see it's evaluated, and now it's not done what it should have done, which is good. I wonder why that is. Oh, there we go. Has worked. So we can see we've taken in our dummy data frame. I've executed that script, and now we've got, as defined in my output schema, that rate as a decimal and my currency. So we've actually got loads of different currencies here, which we don't need. We only need Canadian dollars, Australian dollars, US dollars, and euros. But we can use a join to filter those out. So the first thing I'm going to do to be able to join these to my sales data is I want to split this up on my underscore. So if I go to the menu, I can do split values. And if I do an automatic split, I know Prep's going to pick that up for me, but I actually only want the last value. I'm not bothered about that rates underscore. So I'm just going to split off as my separator being the underscore. I want the last field. So now we can see I've got my currency code. I can drop this field that's just called currency that says rates underscore and then the code. So I'm just going to select my menu, remove that. I'm going to rename this as currency code. And now I'm going to join that to my sales data. So we're going to join on currency code. And because we only have 4 present here, we're going to do an inner join. We're only going to pick up those codes that match. So it doesn't matter that I've got a really long list because they're going to just be filtered out by my join. So if I pick up my clean step, drop it next to my sales data, and we've got our 4,000 records from the sales data are all coming through. We can see we're just picking up those 4 currencies from our API, and we're leaving off the other 164 because they're not present in our sales data. And now we've got a data set where we have our exchange rates attached. So now what I could go and do is convert my spend in a local currency into that one base currency. In this case, actually, the exchange rate that I was calling was in euros. Originally, I used to call the exchange rate in pounds because I'm from London, but the API has now limited me, so I have to pay for that. So we've just got euros. So now I could go and, convert these all into euros, create a, sales by whatever item size or purchase date, or look at my sales over time, all in one currency. We're not going to do that today because the whole point of this process was looking at how you can call an API and how you can use TabPy in your workflows. And there's a whole lot you can do. So like it wouldn't have to just be using APIs. You can do pretty much anything you want in that scripting tool with Python. As long as you're sort of outputting a data frame at the end. And you don't even have to use the data really. Like I've seen people write stuff to databases or call data from databases using this scripting tool. So before, you can now write to database using Tableau prep, although you can't write to every database. So I've seen people in the past, use this scripting tool to input their data frame and then write that to an external database if the database they want to write to is not native to Tableau prep. So there's a whole range of different things you can do with this. I would just encourage people to be experimental with it if it is something that interests you, because as I say, the possibilities are sort of endless. I haven't tried loads and loads of things with it. This was my use case to try and get it to work, but yeah, go and have a stab. As I said, there's a video I used if you wanted to look at how you can deploy this, getting it to work with Tableau server. One thing to caveat that is that, and this is something I believe Tableau are working on, is that you can run flows with scripting steps in them on Tableau server, but you can't do that on Tableau online yet. I'm not sure why, because you can run Python calculations in a workbook on Tableau online. There's just something about Tableau Prep Conductor not working with TabPy at the moment, but I believe that's something that's being fixed. But yeah, that is everything I was going to show. So if you want to connect with me on Twitter or LinkedIn and reach out after session, or if you have any questions, then please, let me know, and I'll be happy to answer them or try to answer them.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Jack. it's always good to get an insight into how to use TabPy. It's not something that I use very much, so that was really clear, those steps. So thanks for talking through. We've got a couple questions in the chat for you. The first one, quite straightforward, I think, but is TabPy free?
Yeah, TabPy is free. It's just, something that you can download from GitHub. You don't have to pay for it. Of course, if you're running it on, I don't know, say if you're running it on a virtual machine, you'd have to pay for that virtual machine, but TabPy itself doesn't cost any money.
Great, great. And just having a like to confirm question, the GitHub link that you sent initially, is that got the script in it and the TabPy setup? Just a refresher of what that link contains.
Yeah, so that link, I can just go to it now. It basically is the official documentation of how to download and install TabPy. So if we just look now, so it just talks you through, the installation instructions, configuration for Tableau server, running it in a virtual environment. You can run it on Heroku. It doesn't have my script in there. I mean, I can share the script if people are interested, but yeah, it's just all about how you can set it up, download it, or the configuration if you wanted to, set it up with username and password, which is what you would likely do if you were deploying this in production. But yeah, that's where all the documentation sits.
Cool, thanks, Jack. Another question here that you may know the answer to. So can TabPy be used to pull data from SharePoint lists?
Yeah, this is actually an interesting one because of a project that I've been working on recently, or with someone. I think it probably can. I've not tried it myself, but if SharePoint has an API, which I'm sure it does, I don't see any reason why you couldn't use TabPy to do that. So yeah, I would go and have a go, Jordan. I don't see why you couldn't, to be honest.
Cool. And could you just clarify again why you use the dummy file rather than adding that scripting step to the flow? Couldn't you just have converted the JSON to a data frame, is the question.
Yeah, so I have the dummy file because that's how I sort of first started building this out. I knew that you have to have an input into the scripting tool that can contain literally anything, but I kind of figured at first you had to have a data frame that matched whatever you'd put in your script, and then the Python and TabPy would overwrite it. I actually found out yesterday that you don't actually need anything. So, I mean, we could test this live, but you just need an input into the scripting tool. You can literally have an empty table. So in theory, I don't actually need this dummy input. I could just branch out another stream to my sales data, just overwrite that, and then join that back to my data set. So yeah, for the purpose of when I first built out this flow, I thought that might be how it had to work. But yeah, apparently you can just input anything in there and it will just overwrite it. And you can also input an empty table. So yeah, Julius, you could just, input nothing into the scripting tool. The key thing is that the scripting tool has to have something going into it. It can't be standalone and just kick things off. So hopefully that makes sense.
Could I just ask a question branching off from that? So the reason you wouldn't add the scripting tool straight after the sales data as well is because you don't want to have to read all of that data into Python and then get it to keep hold of that and then pass it out at the end. There's kind of no point. Is that a true thing to say?
I guess so.
Yeah.
I don't think it would really matter too much, but yeah, I guess you would just obviously make sure you had a separate branch that kept your sales data somewhere, because otherwise it's not going to output it at the end of the script.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I've got a question here that says, can we have 2 or more input data frames for a single TabPy script?
No, is the answer. I don't think. I've never tried, but let's see. No, you could
Okay,
only
it's
like
not an option.
union or join to the output. You just do one. You can have multiple Python scripts or scripting steps within a workflow, but you can't have multiple inputs to that script.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
Is it possible user-friendly too, for example?
Okay, I think that
question.
Yeah. Just to answer that question that came into the chat of can we get a recording afterwards? Yeah, there will be a recording shared on Tableau's YouTube. So don't worry, you can rewatch everything that we've seen today.
Is that last question referring to reusable steps? Is that how you're seeing it?
Relation to previous speakers. Oh, okay. Yeah, that would probably be reusable steps, as you say, Jack, I would think.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, you could, if you've got a set of steps that apply to multiple, source files, but you don't want to have to do that all within one flow, you can. So I could group those. So say dropping those fields and then the join and then the clean. Maybe that's not the best example. I could save these steps as a flow and then publish them, save them either to a file or to my Tableau server. And then someone else could go and use those exact steps and then just hook them up to a similar data set. So for example, in this case, if I knew someone else wanted to connect to the currency API, I could publish this to my Tableau server and they could just pull those down, connect them up to a part of their workflow, and they would run the same. I don't know, hopefully that's answered the question. I think that's kind of what it is saying.
I think
yeah,
so. Cool.
There
is one final question that's in the chat as well, which is asking that when you split that column after the scripting step to create that new column, is that still going to update when you refresh the data now that you split it into a new column? So after the scripting step.
What do you mean, will it still update?
Will those values stay the same after you've run the scripting step? So they're kind of, just basically, is it going to update?
Yes.
Which I think, yes, it's the answer.
Cool. Yeah, it will.
Cool. Okay, I think that's all the questions, there are a lot of them, which is great. So thanks for interacting and asking all those questions, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Brilliant. I'll just finish up with a final slide for you all. So thanks for attending our user group today. This is just a slide for Tableau conference, which is coming up next month. So the 10th to the 11th of November. And that is a free virtual conference. So there's going to be talks from all kinds of different people from the data community going on across those 3 days. So it's a great chance to come along, hear about some of the new and upcoming releases. So there'll probably be some exciting prep news to tune into. So yeah, definitely worth blocking out a little bit of time in the calendar if you're hoping to come to Tableau conference. And yeah, I think that is all that we are hoping to cover today for the user group. So thanks so much for coming today. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your day, however long is left of it. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.